Australian air crews are to join the United States in taking part in the war in Syria. The conflict began with a popular uprising against the regime of President Bashar al-Assad in 2011. Now, they could be the introductory paragraphs to a new story, and in their own terms there's nothing wrong with them. But they commit what is, from the point of view of peace and conflict studies, the cardinal error of using war as a synonym for conflict. And very much of our study in this unit will depend on re-establishing the distinction between them. If you regard war as a synonym for conflict, then there's a risk of violence appearing to be its own cause. There's even a risk that war might seem inevitable. And of course, from a peace point of view, we don't want to think that war is inevitable, so we have to open up some of the distinctions within that intro and peer a little closer under the hood, so to speak. And what we're really interested in is what there was before the war. What took place before the violence? Because you see, there's a fundamental illogicality in appearing to suggest that violence is its own cause, because it must have started somewhere. It must have started at a point in time, and what made it start? To what were the people responding when they started to engage in the violence? And that bit before the violence is the conflict. Now, conflict, therefore, is not the same as violence. So what is conflict? We say that conflict is a situation involving at least two parties who are in relationship, and those two parties have incompatible goals. So the violence might be one form of goal-seeking behaviour by the parties, but it is not the same as the conflict. Now, you could say that, therefore, conflict is all around us. Conflict is an inescapable fact of life. I would even claim that if there's one constant in our lives in these days, we're often being told that the world around us is changing or should change. Lots of people want to bring change. And if you think of changes to your family situation, in your workplace, you may feel that you like some of the changes and you don't like others. And that's the point, that change inevitably suits some people more than others. Therefore, change is inescapably conflictual, because it sets up potentially incompatible goals. All that is to say that we are all immersed in conflicts all the time. Hopefully not responding to them with violence, but instead managing them in various ways, living with them, flexing around them, creating arrangements to handle them, and so forth. Indeed, the fact that we have reached this far in life, if you like, testifies to our ability to handle conflict successfully. And therefore, conflict is not necessarily a problem. It's the way people respond to conflict that could be the problem. And what we hope is that we can find or devise many different ways of responding to conflict in order to avoid violence. So conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. Conflict is probably a good thing. We could say, well, you know, if there were never any changes in the world, then we would be able to do without conflict. But I think equally we could probably all think of changes that we have found welcome, changes that we would like to see. I personally would hesitate to commit myself to live in a world where nothing ever changed. And indeed, if that was the case, then that itself might set up conflicts, because some people would want change and others wouldn't. So conflict is unavoidable. Conflict is a condition of our existence. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with conflicts. We may even need conflict to improve or to make progress. But what is at stake, therefore, is not whether there is conflict. What is at stake in peace and conflict studies is how people respond to conflict. Under what circumstances do people respond with violence? How could people be prompted, enabled, supported in formulating and implementing creative responses that are non-violent? And that's really what's at stake with our definition of conflict, of two or more parties pursuing incompatible goals. So there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing pejorative in that. It's not necessarily a problem. It's always a challenge. and it's our challenge in peace and conflict studies to identify conflicts, analyse conflicts, seek out people who are responding creatively to conflicts and support them, try to identify resources to further those efforts in our quest for a more peaceful world.